What's up, guys? It's the Bluebloods coming at y'all with another episode in our Pac-12 in 31 days theme. We are joined by Arizona State insider and writer for The Athletic. Doug Howler is joining us today, and I just want to say I appreciate you coming on the show, man.
Hey, Zach, I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So we got to start. I've been asking everyone we've had for the Pac-12 this question. August 11th was the day Larry Scott made the decision to postpone the season. Eventually, he reversed course. They had a very, very condensed season, but this decision was praised by a few, condemned by a lot of people once the SEC, ACC, and some of these other conferences started playing football. What was your personal initial reaction to this announcement? And what was Arizona State's plan if he did not change his mind?
Yeah, it was a little strange. They seemed very confident in their decision to put everything on hold until the spring. That's the way things were looking, and then they made a deal with some rapid testing that seemed, that Larry Scott called a game changer. And then, it just like, okay, now what? And then nothing really happened. That was their chance to really put this thing and fast forward and get out there on the field in the fall. But they really didn't. Not until the Big Ten decided they were going to play. And then all of a sudden it was full steam ahead. So it was a little bit strange how it came about. I still think that if the Big Ten would have waited to the spring, the Pac-12 would have done the same. And they wasted, maybe they lost a week or maybe two there where they could have gotten a few more games or given the schedule a little bit of flexibility. But it was just a strange year all the way around. I mean, it was across the entire country, but especially in the Pac-12. I mean, the school I cover, Arizona State, only played 4 games. What do you take from that? It was just kind of bizarre. But the good thing is, I think, and it's good for the players, they actually got on the field and, it was more of kind of like a glorified spring practice, real games. But at the end of it, what do you really take? I think it's just maybe a springboard into this season.
Right, and that's where I want. Yeah, that's where I wanted to get to next. The Sun Devils 2-2. They made the most of an unpredictable, crazy season. The highlight, though, it's always good to beat your in-state rival, but beating them 70-7. I remember my sister was graduating that weekend. We were watching this game on that Friday night. I was like, what is going on here? This is just a beatdown. Did this season, though, I mean, I know it's hard to take away, but just in terms of on the field performance, did this season meet, exceed, or fall short of your preseason expectations for this team?
Well, I mean, going into it, they were expected to contend for the Pac-12, at least the South Division. So it did not meet the expectations, I think, of the media and the fan base, and even their own internal expectations. The 2 games they lost, SC, they had a 2-score lead in the final 4 minutes and gave it up. Really just kind of collapsed there in the final minutes. And then in UCM, then they had to pause for like 4 weeks, and then they came back, played UCLA under really difficult circumstances. Had a chance to win that game up in the 4th quarter and ended up losing. So the takeaway is they had a chance to win all their games. They didn't. They need to work on closing. They know that. That's kind of the motto for this year. The Arizona game, I think, kind of, it was kind of a pick-me-up. It kind of like lifted the program. All the difficulty they'd been through, the pause they had a huge outbreak with COVID. The earlier losses, it seemed like the Arizona game, winning a rivalry game like that, 77, especially in Tucson, I think kind of, erased a lot of that, a lot of the bad feelings. How real was it? I don't know. Arizona's really struggling, and they seem to kind of give up on Kevin Sumlin in that game. But it was good for the program, and just kind of gave them a springboard, as I mentioned, into this season. But the difficulty is how much do you take from that season, 4 games, and kind of stretch it into this season. I mean, they had a running back by the name of Rashad White who averaged 10 yards a carry, the only back in the country to do so. Would he have done that over 12 games? No, he wouldn't have. He would not have. But how much? I mean, was he really that good, or was it just the opponents that he played on any given night? We're not real sure about that yet. But they're in a good place right now.
Right. And there's one star that gets shine. Jayden Daniels at quarterback. He was a breakout freshman 2019. He continued to have a pretty decent year this year in the limited action we saw. What makes Daniels, to you, one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and what do you think his potential is over these next 1 to 2 years?
In fact, he started as a true freshman in 19, and it was pretty impressive that he, his second game, I think it was his second game that year, he went to Michigan State, packed house in East Lansing, and really, it was everything that should have made him play like a true freshman. And he didn't. He rose to the occasion. It was, it came down to like the final drive of the fourth quarter. Arizona State was behind, and he made plays to take him down the field and score the winning touchdown. He did that later against Cal. He did against Washington State. He has uncommon poise. He displayed uncommon poise as a true freshman. Obviously, expectations kind of rocketed his sophomore year, and given the fact they only played 4 games and he was working with mostly a young receiving core, he never really had time to build chemistry. So last year was kind of a step back for him. I think he would admit that. So I think moving forward, it's he's always been known. Jayden Daniels has always been known as one of the country's better young quarterbacks. Now he needs to be one of the country's best quarterbacks, period. And he has he's a thin guy. He's 6'3", 6'4", but he's thin, 180, 185. But he moves well, he runs well, but he doesn't get rattled at all. He's not a guy that locks onto his first read. He'll be patient. If he's under a little bit of pressure, he'll still stick in the pocket and look for his second or third reads. And if he has to run, he can make plays. So I know that he's thinking, or at least there's some talk that he's thinking that if he has a good year, he'll leave early, but he needs to have a good year in order to do that.
Right. I mean, and really and truly, this Arizona State team's only going to go as far as Jayden Daniels probably takes them, like you said. But there's also a guy who I don't think gets enough talk as a head coach, and that's Herm Edwards. And we've covered some pretty outstanding coaches on the podcast throughout all these conferences we covered, but I don't know if there's been one as credentialed as Herm. And he's going into his 4th season as the coach of the Sun Devils. What made him the guy to take over Arizona State, and what has been the biggest changes around the program under Herm Edwards?
When Herm Edwards was hired, during that hiring process, after they fired Todd Graham, we had heard, and actually Ray Anderson, the athletic director, said that he might even talk to Herm Edwards and use him as a consultant in the hiring process. Bounce ideas off of him. It wasn't until midway through the search that we realized, like, wait a minute, Herm is not a consultant. He's a leading candidate. And at the time, it just seemed so bizarre. Like, what are they thinking? It didn't help that Ray Anderson used to be an agent, used to represent Herm Edwards. They're good friends. The fan base did not warm up to that at all. It looked like Ray Anderson was just hiring one of his old buddies who had been in a broadcast, being in an ESPN studio for like the last 9 years. Hadn't coached in college in decades. It's like, what are they doing? I was critical of it. The national media was critical of it. It just didn't seem to make sense. And later, when I talked to Ray Anderson about it, he said, "You know what?" He said, "Everybody who had not met Herm Edwards, criticized that hire. Everyone who knew Herm Edwards, everyone who had met Herm Edwards in the past, understood." And I think that's absolutely right, because if you're around Herm Edwards for 5 minutes, you feel like you've known him your entire life. He just has a way of disarming people, of connecting with people, and that's just the personal side. His hire went from terrible hire among the local community to let's give this guy a chance to wow, this guy can maybe take us to where we want to go in a short period of time. And the other side of it, he has the coaching background. I mean, he's been around this game for his entire adult life. He's coached at the highest level. He's been around, I mean, you name it. I always ask him, like, let me see your phone, because he knows everybody in sports, not just football, everybody. But he has a way of connecting with players. Even though he's 66, he has a way of connecting with players. He has the coaching background, and he's surrounded himself. He's been really smart about how he's done this, Zach. He's surrounded himself with really good coaches that have NFL ties. So there's a lot of knowledge in those offices, and also some really young coaches who are like, they have 3 coaches who are under 30 who help them in recruiting. So in the meantime, he's coaching them, getting them up to speed, as far because of their lack of experience. But it just goes back that he just has a way of making people believe that good things are going to happen. And, and we saw the first year when he was out there, he outcoached some pretty big names in the sport, and he backs up that end of it as well. So he's been really good for Arizona State. But they need, he's approaching year 4 now, so they've been right around that 7-win, 8-win mark. Sun Bowl, Vegas Bowl. They need to take the next step and definitely contend for that South Championship this year.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we saw the first steps being taken. The maroon and gold game wrapped up spring practice for the Sun Devils in late March. There were a bunch of storylines that a lot of people were paying attention to, but for you personally, what storylines were you watching most closely, and what were your biggest takeaways overall from spring practice?
Well, you mentioned Jayden Daniels. That's where you start. That's the box you check first. The other thing is, with this extra year that the NCAA provided because of COVID, the entire secondary returned. Everybody came. All those seniors. They had all seniors at those 2 corner positions and the safety positions last year. They all decided to come back. So at corner, you're going to have Chase Lucas, who will be a 5-year starter. I mean, how that never happens. He's going to be a 5-year starter. Their defense returns not only all 11 starters, but all 22 in their first and second, depth chart, their first team and second team. So they've been a good defense. Can they become a great defense? Can they go up to Utah when Utah usually out-muscles Arizona State? Last time they were there, they won 16-3. Just Jayden Daniels, the freshman, just beat him up. Can Arizona State be that aggressive team? Can they be that aggressive defense where they just go in and no matter what the offense does, if it's raining and they can't throw the ball, whatever, the defense says, I got you. We're going to take care of this. Can they become that defense? They're close. Can they do it? The offensive line has been a question mark. I've covered Arizona State a little over 10 years. Every year, that going into every season, you stand out there at spring ball, you look at the offensive line, you say, okay, they got maybe 3 or 4 guys. Somebody gets hurt, they're in trouble. This has been the first year, Zach, in a long time where they look pretty solid up front. They have 4 returning starters. They have 2 or 3 guys who have a chance, I think, to be, plug-in guys and where they don't have a drop-off. So the offensive line looks in good shape. It's really one of the few springs I've looked around, and it's not like, okay, this is the obvious. The defensive line is going to be the big question mark this year. The secondary is going to be the big question mark. They really don't have a huge question mark. The only concern would be the receivers. And, it might be the most talented room that they have, that most talented position room. They have 5 4-star guys, I think 8 guys who were ranked in the top 100 coming out of high school at that position. The problem is they're all young. They're all sophomores, 3rd-year guys, guys who don't have a whole lot of experience. Last year that killed them because Jayden Daniels, who had been used to throwing to Brandon Ayuk, a first-round draft pick, didn't really have that chemistry with anybody. So can he identify a go-to target and build a chemistry with them? But other than that, there aren't a lot of holes on this roster right now.
Right. And I mean, that kind of leads in. You mentioned the whole defense is back. And that kind of, you saw that in recruiting, which wrapped up, back in February. Only a class of 13 high school guys. There wasn't a big influx of high school talent this year, but they also reeled in 7 impact transfer guys from all around the country that could contribute immediately. But for you, what were the biggest positional needs in this recruiting cycle, and who are some of the instant impact guys that you see coming in and playing day one for Arizona State?
Well, to start, we thought it was going to be corner because they were going to lose those guys, those 2 starters, Jack Jones and Chase Lucas. And they actually did go out. They got a 4-star athlete from Florida, a kid by the name of Tommy Hill, who was there in the spring. He's going to be a starter as soon as he gets the opportunity. And also Isaiah Johnson, who is from originally, I think, from West Virginia and then transferred to California, the number 9 corner in the class. So they checked that box. They're good there for the future, appear to be good. But they did, like a lot of schools in the country, and they mentioned this on the first signing day, is they held back like 7 scholarships for transfer reasons because they knew the portal was going to be crazy, and it was. And that's where they really filled some holes. They need some help in the tight end room. Zach Hill, their new offensive coordinator, who was there last year, he likes to use the tight ends. Well, he didn't have much to work with, and they went out and got a transfer from Oklahoma by the name of Jalen Conyers. He coming out of high school a couple years ago, he was the 5th-rated the number 5 tight end coming out of high school in the country. 6'5", moves well. He was there in the spring. Looks looks the part. I don't know how physical will be in the run game. There's not a lot of hitting going on in the spring, but they have a guy who can help them there. They need their defensive line has last year took a step where they could get a pass rush just based off those first four guys, but they needed a difference maker up front. Trevez Moore from LSU was a transfer. Got caught behind some guys at LSU. Obviously, LSU has a lot of talent. Transferred to ASU, and who knows what kind of impact he'll make. But he ran with the second team. Still learning the defense in the spring, and he was disruptive at times, so he could help them. And then they have some other guys like on the offensive line, Tristan Miller from North Carolina that will give them some depth. So, and also a receiver. I mentioned that they were young there. They got a receiver from Utah, Brian Thompson, who's kind of a stretch the field guy. And that's huge because the Pac-12 just announced that, they did away with the interconference transferring rule that made them sit out a little bit more. So he'll be able to play immediately. So they really kind of cashed in on the transfer market. And they should have some guys who should help them immediately.
Absolutely. And, kind of building off of that, every year when we saw Jayden Daniels in 2019 have his breakout season, who are some guys that we might be overlooking right now for Arizona State that could really shine and have their breakout year next year?
Well, it's going to have to be in the receiver room because someone's going to have to step up. And the guy that impressed me most during the spring was a guy who didn't even play last year. He couldn't play. He was allowed to practice, but was academically ineligible. His name's Elijah Badger, a kid from out of the Sacramento area who in high school was, went both ways. He was recruited both as a corner and as a receiver. I thought, there were some whispers. So, we weren't allowed to watch practice last year, but there were some whispers that he was really impressive in practice as a true freshman. And then in spring ball, I thought he might have been their best receiver. So he ran mostly with the second team. They gave him some first team reps, but he's a guy that looks like he could be a difference maker there. And then I also still think, LV Bunkley Shelton is a receiver who did play last year as a true freshman, guy that you put in the slot. And when you need, third down, and you need first down, when you just need to move the ball, he's going to be the guy they're probably going to go to because he just has a knack for getting open. So I would start with the receivers, and I would start with those two guys.
Right. And when I look at the schedule, looking ahead to 2021, I really see a real opportunity for Arizona State to come out of that Pac-12 South. They're in a position to really make a good run at the Pac-12 championship. I mean, those road games, Utah, UCLA, those are looming large. The USC game always make or break game for that division. But for you, what is the ceiling and or floor for the 2021 Arizona State team?
The ceiling is the Pac-12 championship game. If they're not going to do it, when they brought in Jayden Daniels, they felt like he was a quarterback who could do that, who could take them there. If this is his last year, it's not a huge window. They don't have, behind him, they have really young quarterbacks who there's no obvious number two right now. So this is it for them. This is their window. How often do you have a quarterback who, is a potential, if he had, some people think he's a first round draft pick. I don't know. I'm not an NFL scout. But he looks like a quarterback who's going to play in the NFL one day. How often do you have that in place? How often do you return your entire defense? How often do you have two running backs, Rashard White and Chip Trayanum, who was a pretty good combination last year? And how often do you have four stars returning on the offensive line? They don't have a lot of excuses. They need to really capitalize here. The downside is I guess if what's the ceiling, what's the basement, is that Arizona State never does well when there are high preseason expectations. They just are a program that, whenever there's a big game and you show up, you turn on ESPN, they're playing Oregon, they get stomped. I think it was in 2015 or 16 where Kirk Herbstreit picked them to go to the college football playoff preseason. They finished 5-6 or 6-7. It was just a miserable season. The fans there's part of the fan base act right now that's pretty nervous because of that. So, will they trip up? Will they lose games that they're not supposed to lose? They go to Corvallis, Oregon State in November. Fans are always going to remember that 2014 trip when they were number 6 in the BCS rankings late in November. Looked like they controlled the South, and then they lost to a bad Oregon State team in freezing temperatures. So, it's kind of they're kind of in a position where I'll believe it when I see it, and that's just the way it is. They have to go out and prove it.
Right. And, this next question is kind of just about not only Arizona State, but just the Pac-12 as a whole. We saw new head of the Pac-12 coming in, new commissioner, but he talked about a lot about the perception of the Pac-12. And we saw that where there's 4 seats at the table for the college football playoff. And if Arizona State competing for the Pac-12 title, that means there needs to be some talk of college football playoff hopes. But the Pac-12 always seems to be that fifth man out. The SEC champion, always going to get in. ACC champion, same thing. Same for Big Ten. The Pac-12 seems to be left out. Like when Utah and Oregon were playing for the Pac-12 title, neither of them were going to have a shot, according to any major expert. Why do you think the Pac-12 doesn't get the respect it deserves? And why is there this perception that there's not as much parity in this conference as there is in other conferences?
Well, I mean, I know some people would say there's a bias toward, the East. That is real, but it's not the case here. That's just an excuse. I mean, the Pac-12 just hasn't backed it up. I mean, they haven't performed well. You mentioned Oregon. 2019, Oregon comes into Tempe late in the year and, play, I think they're 6th in the country. They play an Arizona State team that's lost 4 in a row, an Arizona State team that has a freshman quarterback. Beat Arizona State, you have, and then go on and win the Pac-12 championship, you might be one of those top 4 teams. They lost to Arizona State, an Arizona State team they should not have lost to. So they've had opportunities, the conference has, and they just haven't capitalized. And also, I mean, I think there is some, it's not as important out here. The fan, I used to when I used to go to an Arizona State game, I'd park in media parking and I'd walk up and I used to try to see like how close can I get to the stadium before I realize it's game day. And I would get pretty close some days. That doesn't happen at Ohio State. That doesn't happen at Florida State. That doesn't happen at different schools, right? Maybe it does at Florida State.
Now that might be a bad example today. But
I used to help out in Florida State a long time ago, back during the Bobby Bowden glory years. So that's a bad example. But it doesn't. There's not the fan passion out here that there is other places. Only in rare circumstances. When Oregon's rolling, obviously, yeah. When SC's rolling, yeah. Utah's always good. But the fan passion's not as strong. The Pac-12 network's kind of been a disaster. So, they have some things to fix, no doubt. And the Pac-12 commissioner, the new one, the best thing about it is he won the press conference just by saying football is important. That's all he had to say, standing ovation. So that kind of explains where they're at. But, nothing's going to change until they start getting into the CFP and start, challenging and just playing a better brand of football.
Right. Yep. I mean, but we've been plugging parity on this podcast since we started it. Like I think it's always, in the Big Ten, it's Ohio State and everybody else. In the Pac-12, it's either USC or Oregon, everybody else. And I think there's a lot of good teams overlooked in a lot of these conferences. But last question here, man. I'm from Southern Alabama, so I've not made it out to Arizona yet. Arizona State was actually on my graduate school list, so I was thinking about going there. I was scheduling a visit depending on how things worked out. Sadly, didn't get to go. But what makes Tempe and the Sun Devil football stadium such a unique environment on game days?
Well, to start, you have to start with the heat. I forget the stat, but I don't think Arizona State has lost to a Big Ten team at home in about a decade. And the reason is they come in September and they're playing in 100-degree heat. Pretty much for the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, at 7 o'clock at night, you're still kicking off in triple digits. That is different. So and of course, that takes away maybe from the atmosphere at times because, no fan wants to go out there and sit in that heat when they get, watch on the flat screen at home. But, I just think it's different, but, it's like anything else that, they really, if there's a big game, a big moment, then, the fans do come out and it is a pretty electric atmosphere in Sun Devil Stadium. They've just remodeled it. So they do some pretty cool things with the lighting there. And, Arizona State has upgraded its facilities here recently. So, as I mentioned earlier, they really don't have any excuses. But, it's really, watching a football game in the desert is definitely different than I've covered Ohio State and Michigan before. And, shivering out there in 30-degree temperatures. It's definitely a different atmosphere when you're sitting in the desert in the sunshine, or even at night. There's been times where there's been a dust storm come in at, I think it was USC, ASU a few years ago, where a dust storm came in. That was different, but definitely a different environment.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'm definitely wanting to make it out there. I got to knock off some Pac-12 stadiums. I haven't. That's like the one conference I haven't been to a game yet. So I need to get out west, go to some Pac-12 games. But man, I appreciate you joining me, talking all this Arizona State football. But where can our listeners find you? I know you're a writer for the Athletic. That's one I've been. We've had a few people from the Athletic on here. That's one of my favorite sites. So I urge all my listeners to go. Please check out the Athletic. But where can they find you in particular?
Well, I'm on Twitter, of course. It's just at Doug Haller, Haller. But at the Athletic, just www.athletic.com. If you don't know what the Athletic is, it's kind of like an online Sports Illustrated. We kind of pride ourselves on storytelling, going more in depth than everything's real quick reaction. I don't write a whole lot of stories off Twitter. If there's some news that breaks, I'm going to take the extra step to tell a more complete story. Some of the things I've done recently, we have a State of the Program series with college football where we do every in-depth magazine style previews on every just about almost every team in the conference, or every team in the country for the most part, every power team for sure, or power conference team for sure. And I think mine should be up. My Arizona State one ran a few weeks ago, but it's probably the most complete preview you're going to find. And then more recently, I did the coaching staff actually got together recently after spring ball and ranked the top 25 players on each side of the ball. I tried to get those rankings. No one would give them up. So I did my own. So that's just kind of a fun thing to do in the off season. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to work there. And I think our subscribers really enjoy it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've been a subscriber for a while now. That best content out there in terms of writing and online articles and stuff like that. So guys, make sure to go follow Doug. That way you can keep up with all things Arizona State football. Make sure to go check out the Athletic. Promise you won't regret it. But guys, this is a wrap for Arizona State. Make sure to check out some games this fall. You're not going to want to miss it. But we'll be back later this week with another Pac-12 in 31 days. And, of course, our interview with Akil Glass, Alabama A&M quarterback and SWAC Player of the Year is out. Make sure to go check that out as well. But, guys, for Doug, myself, and the Blue Bloods, we are out.